In the cold black of deep space, far beyond any star system or known trade route, the Jaran medical ship Velan floated like a wounded bird, broken and silent, drifting between nothing and nowhere. Inside, the narrow corridors flickered with dim emergency lights, and the constant hum of life support systems had turned into a weak sputter, barely keeping the crew alive after the ambush, an attack that came without warning, without mercy, and left the ship crippled, its engines offline, its FTL drive shattered. They had been ferrying medical supplies and refugees from the outer colonies when the unknown vessels, sharp, dark shapes that shimmered like ghosts, emerged from the void and opened fire, ignoring the distress beacons and offering no communication, leaving dozens dead in the first strike, including the ship's captain. And now, weeks later, the survivors clung to each other and to fading hope as food rations ran low and the oxygen levels dropped each cycle. Tekel, a young Jaran technician with pale skin and 4 thin fingers on each hand, moved carefully through the corridor past fallen panels and cracked walls, clutching a worn tool pack, trying for the 100th time to boost power to the long-range beacon, the only system they had been able to keep working since the attack. And as he crawled into the cramped conduit near the ship's communications tower, he tried not to think about how quiet everything had become. No one spoke much anymore, and even the medical wing had fallen silent after the final power cells were drained to keep the heating on during the last cold surge. But still Tekel worked, not because he believed someone would come, but because working kept him from thinking about the alternative. Outside the hull, through the scratched viewport, the stars blinked like indifferent eyes, far away and uncaring, and the nebulae that had once seemed beautiful now looked like distant smoke from forgotten wars. Then suddenly, as he reconnected a burnt-out circuit near the external transceiver, a new sound cut through the silence. A soft, repeating ping, rhythmic, deliberate, not from inside the ship but from beyond it. A signal? No, not one of theirs. His heart beat faster, and he slid down from the conduit, scrambling toward the nearest terminal, his hands shaking as he rerouted what little power they had left into the comm system. A new wave signature had appeared, faint but constant, and as the translator began processing, it became clear it wasn't random. It was language, structured and deliberate, and though distorted, it held one unmistakable marker. It was human. Tekel stared at the screen, breath-catching, his mind racing with old stories, some told with respect, others with fear, about the species from the blue planet who had entered galactic space only decades ago and changed everything. Fierce, unpredictable, but relentless and loyal to those they called allies. With shaking hands, he activated the emergency reply protocol and sent a short burst repeating the Velan's distress ID and coordinates. Then stood frozen, staring at the terminal, hoping it would return something. Anything. But the screen just blinked, and the signal faded into static again. Despair began to creep back into his chest when suddenly a secondary sensor pinged again. This time stronger. Closer. Tekel raced to the forward viewport, his breath fogging on the cold glass as a dark shape emerged from the stars, slowly growing in size, angular, silver-gray, with a design unlike any Jaran vessel but familiar from distant reports. A human ship, its lights pulsing gently as it approached, not with weapons hot, but with a calm, controlled precision. He stumbled back, then ran toward the center corridor, shouting down the halls for the others, his voice echoing through the still ship. Someone had heard them. Someone was coming, and for the first time in endless, silent cycles, the crew of the Velan had a reason to believe they might survive, not because their ship worked, not because their systems were functional, but because out there, against all odds, a human vessel had changed course for them, a decision that would alter not just their fate, but perhaps the fate of species who thought no one would ever care again. On the bridge of the human exploration ship ISS Dauntless, Captain Mira Thorne leaned over the central console, eyes narrowed as she stared at the strange signal repeating on the main screen, a faint but steady pulse coming from a forgotten corner of space where no active route existed, no colonies had been established, and no alliance forces were supposed to operate. The signal was weak and distorted, but something about it caught her attention. It wasn't natural interference, nor was it mechanical noise from a dead satellite. It had structure, fragments of code too complex for a natural source, yet far too desperate to be a trap. And when her ship's AI, Argus, managed to clean a section of the waveform, a long-forgotten Jaran beacon ID flickered into focus. Mira straightened, her thoughts racing. The Jarans hadn't communicated with humans in over 6 years, not since the diplomatic talks at the Orion Gate failed. And while no war had come, there was tension, silence, and distance between the species ever since. So a Jaran signature out here, so far from known space, was strange enough, but a distress beacon. That was something else entirely. Her first officer, Commander Harris, suggested ignoring it, warning it could be bait or worse, a scavenger ploy to hijack human tech. But Mira didn't believe that, not with the way the signal repeated, like a whisper on the edge of panic. And though protocol urged caution, her instincts, those same instincts that had kept her alive through 2 deployments and 3 deep space rescue missions, told her this was no trick, just someone or something that didn't want to die alone. Making her decision, she ordered the Dauntless to change course, despite the crew's unease, and as the stars outside the viewport began to twist with the slow shift of warp drive alignment, Mira kept her eyes on the signal, watching as it grew clearer with each passing hour, until finally, the Dauntless dropped out of FTL in a lonely patch of space, empty and silent except for the drifting shape ahead, a ship, dark and barely powered, its hull scarred and fractured. The long fins of a medical frigate stretched like broken wings, and its ID confirmed the worst. This was indeed a Jaran vessel. The Velon, reported missing weeks ago, presumed destroyed or lost in uncharted space. Sensors showed minimal life signs, a fragile atmosphere, and no working drives, just a floating tomb in the middle of nowhere. Yet still, the signal pulsed, as if even the ship itself was refusing to die. Mira ordered a cautious scan, and Argus revealed faint movement inside, scattered heat signatures. Life, yes, but weak, clustered near emergency shelters and core rooms, barely holding on. Her heart tightened, and as she opened a channel, static crackled for a long moment, then suddenly shifted into something clearer. A voice, uncertain and strained, responding in broken trade language. "Help. Receiving you. This is Velon. Survivors. Request aid." The words were basic, but real, and Mira exchanged a brief look with Harris before keying her mic and replying. "This is Captain Mira Thorne of the ISS Dauntless. We received your signal. We're here to help." Silence followed, long enough that she thought the message might not have been understood. But then another voice, different this time, quieter, younger, answered, "Human ship. You came?" Mira smiled slightly, tension thick in the air as the crew waited for the next steps, and she ordered the ship into a holding pattern a safe distance away, avoiding direct docking for now while protocols were checked and a boarding team prepared. Down in the hangar, engineers readied medical supplies, generators, and atmosphere stabilizers, while security units reviewed old Jaran layouts in case of danger. But Mira couldn't shake the strange feeling rising in her gut. Not fear, but something colder, as if the quiet ship ahead held not just survivors, but secrets, ones that had drifted for far too long in silence. Back on the Velon, Tekel crouched near the forward sensor array, watching the human ship through the reinforced glass, its design unfamiliar but somehow strong, like a predator wrapped in armor. And though his people had warned him of humans told stories of their warlike history and fierce independence, he didn't see monsters in that shape, only hope. And as he backed away from the window to find the others, he repeated the words the human had spoken, as if saying them aloud might make them more real. "We're here to help." Behind him, lights flickered again, the final power reserves straining to keep warmth and air in place. But no one moved to shut the signal off now. Instead, they watched, waited, and hoped that these strange, unpredictable beings from Earth would prove the stories wrong, or perhaps make them true in a way no one had expected. The air inside the Velon was cold and still, like a ship that had already given up. But in one corner of the control deck, a soft light glowed from a screen, showing the strange human ship holding position nearby. steady and silent, like a watchful guardian. Tikel stood beside it, heart pounding in his chest, unsure if what was happening was real or just the last illusion of a dying mind. But then the voice came again, clear and firm through the old communication speakers. "This is Captain Mira Thorne of the ISS Dauntless, repeating. We received your signal, and we are prepared to assist." Around him, the remaining crew of the Veilon gathered slowly, faces pale and tired, some wrapped in emergency heat blankets, others wearing oxygen masks, all staring at the screen as if it might blink out at any second, as if the humans might disappear like everything else they had lost. The Jaran second officer, a grizzled veteran named Sean, stepped forward, wary and cautious, reminding Tikel in a low voice that humans were unpredictable, aggressive, and historically untrustworthy. But even as he spoke, his eyes never left the glowing form of the Dauntless. Tikel nodded out of habit, but didn't agree. Not anymore. He had heard that voice, not harsh or demanding, but calm and sure, like someone who wasn't here to conquer or scavenge, but to help. At last, Sean gave a slow nod and allowed Tikel to respond, and with trembling fingers, the young technician opened the channel and spoke in the trade language he barely remembered from academy days. "This is the Veilon. We are alive, many injured, engines lost, air low, please advise." A brief pause followed, then the human captain's voice returned, softer this time. "Understood. We're preparing a boarding team. Please confirm docking coordinates and access routes. No weapons will be drawn unless threatened." Those last words hung heavy in the air, and several Jarans exchanged tense looks, old fears and ancient warnings flaring in their minds. But Tikel overrode the hesitation and sent a docking code to one of the few working airlocks, bypassing 3 faulty doors with manual commands he had memorized over the long, sleepless weeks. Minutes later, the sensors showed a small shuttle leaving the Dauntless, sleek and shaped like a dart, gliding through space toward them with silent confidence, and inside the dim hangar where emergency lights flickered weakly, the Jarans waited, not with weapons but with frozen nerves and thin hope, as the shuttle connected, sealed, and hissed open with a rush of recycled air. The first human to step aboard was a tall figure in black and gray armor, helmet sealed, visor glowing faint blue, followed by 2 others, one carrying a large case with red medical markings, the other scanning with a compact sensor tool that beeped quietly in the stillness. The lead human removed her helmet, revealing a face with sharp eyes and dark hair tied back, expression serious but not cruel, and she spoke again, this time in slightly accented but clear trade speech. "Captain." "Mira Thorne, we've come to help. Are you in command?" Sean stepped forward, hesitated, then gave a short bow of his head. "Acting Officer Sean. This is Tikel, Engineer. We are grateful, though surprised you responded. Jaran space is far from yours." Mira gave a short nod, her gaze sweeping over the broken lights, the frost forming on the bulkheads, and the shaking crew members barely able to stand. "Your signal reached a long-range relay near the Satori belt. We were the closest ship. We don't abandon distress calls." Something about the way she said it made Tikel believe her completely, even though part of him still expected things to go wrong, for weapons to be drawn or demands to be made. But instead, the humans got to work. Within minutes, they had passed out portable heaters, oxygen tanks, and nutrient packs. And their medical officer, a calm woman named Dr. Reyes, was already tending to a Jaran child with burns from a collapsed engine panel. Tikel followed Mira as she moved through the halls, taking in the damage, asking quiet questions, and nodding with understanding when he explained the system's failure, the attack, the loss of their captain, and how they had kept the beacon running by hand for days. When they reached the shattered engineering core, Mira crouched by a half-melted relay and studied it with surprising knowledge, her fingers brushing the edge of a damaged cable with the care of someone who understood. "Machines is more than just tools. You held out longer than most would have," she said, not as flattery, but as a simple truth, and Tikel felt something shift inside him, like a wall he hadn't noticed beginning to fall. But even as hope returned to the Veilon, the Dauntless sent new data to Mira's wrist console, an alert about unusual activity on the outer sensors, faint energy readings at the edge of the system, like shadows circling the dark. Mira frowned, eyes narrowing as she stepped back from the damaged core. "We may not be alone out here." She called her team on the comm, told them to finish what they could quickly, and instructed the Dauntless to scan for cloaked vessels or residual warp trails. Back on the bridge, Sean looked uneasy again, warning that the same unknown ships that attacked them might be returning. Silent raiders who never revealed their identity and never left survivors. Mira didn't argue. She simply relayed orders and had Argus boost the Vaylon's defensive shielding remotely, enough to hold for a short fight if needed. Tikel watched her move, calm in crisis, steady as gravity, and wondered how a species so feared could send someone like her, not just a warrior but a protector. As the first human engineers prepared to return to the shuttle with wounded Gerans, the deck trembled ever so slightly, just a whisper of motion through the floor that made every survivor freeze. Then a soft alarm chimed, and the Dauntless's voice spoke in Mira's earpiece. "Unidentified signature. 2 vessels approaching. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Mira looked at Tikel, her voice low but certain. "We're not done yet, but you're not alone anymore." The darkness beyond the broken hull of the Vaylon seemed to press in closer as 2 faint signatures moved through space, silent and steady, without any known broadcast codes or alliance identifiers, and on the bridge of the human ship ISS Dauntless. Captain Mira Thorne stared at the growing sensor blips with a cold edge in her eyes. Knowing these weren't patrol ships or random traders, these were the same ghost-like vessels that had crippled the Geran medical frigate weeks ago, and now they were back, drawn by the reactivated beacon or the sudden human presence. Their approach slow but certain, like predators returning to claim what they had started. On board the Vaylon, the news spread quickly, and tension thickened in the narrow halls where survivors had just begun to believe they might be saved, while human engineers and medics worked faster, strapping down gear and helping the weakest, toward the boarding shuttle, preparing for a fast evacuation if things turned violent. Tikel moved beside Mira, watching the flickering screen where the enemy vessels grew clearer. Sharp, angular shapes with no standard engine flares, just a strange, cold energy at their core, unfamiliar and wrong in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen them once before during the attack, only brief flashes through shattered viewports as they fired without warning, and even now the memory made his skin crawl, because there had been no message, no symbol, just death from the dark. Mira tapped her wrist console, transmitting a full tactical report back to the Dauntless, ordering defense turrets to full standby, and instructing the bridge AI, Argus, to project shield coverage over the Vaylon's weakest hull sections, using precise alignment and overlapping arcs. If it came to a fight, the humans would protect the crippled Geran ship for as long as possible. Back near the docking ring, Commander Harris led a second squad across, reinforcing the hangar and setting up portable barriers, while Dr. Reyes refused to abandon her patients, helping move the injured Gerans to the safest internal compartments. Mira glanced at Tikel, her voice low but steady. "If those ships attack, we'll hold them back. But if they board, your people must be ready to evacuate. Can you help organize them?" And Tikel nodded, his fear buried beneath a strange fire rising in his chest. Not just fear, but a will to stand, to do something, even if all he had was old access codes and broken circuits. As he ran through the ship, using the failing intercom to direct survivors toward the shuttle bays and shielding zones, the deck vibrated again, stronger this time, and outside the blackness seemed to ripple, as if space itself was bending around the incoming ships. Argus sent a warning through all human and Geran channels at once. Unidentified vessels within weapons range. No response to hails. Estimated time to contact, 2 minutes. The bridge of the Dauntless glowed red, and Mira returned to her ship in a flash, ordering all crew to battle stations, while keeping the comms open to the Vaylon, repeating again and again, "We are not leaving you. Hold position. We are shielding you." As the enemy ships closed in, their hulls came into full view. Sleek, sharp constructs of black metal. No windows, no lights. Just thin red lines pulsing across their surface like veins. And still no message, no signal, no words. Just weapons. Charging. Then, without warning, the lead vessel fired, a bolt of dark energy tearing through the void, hitting the human shields with a flash of light and shaking both ships, But the Dauntless held firm, returning fire with precision, not to kill but to push back, bursts of kinetic force striking the attacker's armor. Mira's voice stayed calm as she directed volleys, instructing her officers to track energy fluctuations and watch for boarding signs. And on the Veilon, Tekel and Shan sealed off non-essential compartments, directing air to life support sections and bracing weakened panels, all while listening to the echo of battle outside. One of the enemy ships suddenly split its attention, swinging wide and angling toward the Veilon, weapons glowing again, and Mira saw it instantly, ordering a hard maneuver that slammed the Dauntless between the attacker and the damaged ship. Her own hull taking the blast as human shields flickered, then surged brighter. Internal systems on the Dauntless warned of overload, but Mira didn't flinch, yelling to reroute power and keep the shields up, no matter the cost. Finally, after a tense 30 seconds that felt like hours, Argus detected a shift. The enemy ships pulled back slightly, no damage showing, but their movement less direct now, like animals testing boundaries. And then, as suddenly as they came, they turned, not retreating exactly, but slipping away into the dark, their forms melting into the void without a word or trace. Silence fell, heavy and strange, as the sensor screens returned to quiet, showing nothing but empty space where death had nearly arrived, and on both ships, no one spoke for a long moment, just the sound of systems recovering, of air hissing through vents, of survivors breathing again. Tekel leaned against the wall, exhausted but alive, and watched as Mira reappeared through the docking corridor, helmet off, face calm but eyes burning with focus. "They'll be back," she said, softly, not as a warning, but as a promise. "But next time we'll be ready, together." And though the Veilon was still broken, and the danger far from over, something stronger than fear filled the hearts of its crew now. A human had stood between them and death, not for gain, not for power, but because no one deserved to be left alone in the dark. The hours after the enemy ships vanished were thick with tension, as the crew of both the Dauntless and the Veilon tried to recover, knowing deep down that the retreat had not been surrender but a pause, a scout's retreat, the silence before a storm. And Mira Thorne stood at the center of her bridge with her arms crossed, eyes on the tactical screen, reviewing every scan and energy spike from the encounter, while Argus ran simulations and plotted probabilities. Drift Point was little more than a name on old star charts, a forgotten waypoint between sectors that had no traffic, no stations, no resources. But it was where the Zharans had been attacked, where they had drifted for weeks, and now, it seemed, it had become something more, a battlefield in waiting. Reports from the Veilon confirmed they had restored minimal life support and sealed the worst hull breaches with human help, but their engines were still offline and their systems barely holding together, so Mira ordered her engineers to begin tether prep. If the enemy returned, the only chance was to move together, one ship dragging the other to a safer zone while holding off attackers. Tekel worked side by side with human technicians, sharing knowledge, fixing old systems, and watching with quiet amazement as they worked fast, focused, and without judgment. The human commander, Harris, said little, but his actions spoke loudly, staying near the Veilon at all times, coordinating defenses, installing pulse turrets on its outer hull that shimmered with blue light, and reinforcing the hangar doors with portable barriers, because no one knew what kind of boarding force the enemy might send if they came again. They didn't have to wait long. Just before the 16th hour, the Dauntless's sensors lit up again, not with 2, but 4 unknown vessels. Same shape, same dark metal, same silent approach. No signals, no words, just cold, hungry movement, cutting through space like blades toward Drift Point. Mira snapped orders fast, red alert across both ships, all combat teams armed, all power shifted to shields and weapons, and Argus pushed the Dauntless forward to block the advance, the tether lines from the Zharan ship still trailing behind, like lifelines of light. The enemy came in fast this time, no testing, no slow orbit, just weapons firing, beams of pure force slamming into the human shields and lighting the dark with bursts of fire. The Dauntless answered with every cannon and missile it had, firing controlled bursts meant to disable, not destroy, but the enemy didn't flinch, didn't dodge, just kept coming like machines programmed only for destruction. And this time, they tried to flank, two ships swinging around toward the Veilon as the other two hammered the Dauntless head-on. Mira adjusted strategy instantly, ordering the tether released and the Veilon to drift behind asteroid cover nearby, buying space and using the debris to block line of sight, while her ship looped in a dangerous arc, drawing fire away and trying to split the attackers. The plan almost worked, but one enemy vessel followed the Jaran ship, moving low and quiet, hugging the shadows, and it wasn't until a boarding alert sounded that they knew it had launched something. Small pods, cutting through the dark, slamming against the side of the Veilon with magnetic force. Inside, Sean and a handful of Jarans grabbed salvaged rifles, moving to intercept, while the human Marines left behind held the entry corridors, waiting in silence as red lights blinked and distant clanging echoed through the ship. Tekel, back in the engine bay, heard the breach alarms and didn't run. He stayed, forcing broken relays to function, using human battery packs and raw wire to restart auxiliary thrusters, sweat running down his face as sparks jumped and heat flared. In the cramped room, on the Dauntless, Mira saw the alert too and cursed under her breath. She couldn't help directly, not now, not without breaking the fight balance, so she made a hard call. Argus launched 2 drone fighters, each equipped with sensor disruptors and light weapons. Not enough to win a fight, but enough to confuse the enemy ship and maybe force it back. Meanwhile, inside the Veilon, the boarders broke through, tall figures wrapped in black armor with glowing red visors, moving like they had no bones, no hesitation, and they didn't speak, didn't demand, didn't warn. They just advanced, weapons humming with silent energy. The first human Marine went down with a blast to the chest, but the second dropped one of the enemy with a clean shot to the head. And to everyone's shock, the thing sparked. Not blood, not organic reaction, but metal and wire and something else. Something not quite machine, not quite alive. Sean barked orders in Jaran tongue, pushing back with the help of a human sergeant named Lewis, the two moving like they'd trained together for years, not minutes, fighting back with desperation and sudden unity, while Tekel finally got power flowing and shouted over the comms that thruster control was online. They could move, not fast, not far, but enough to avoid direct fire. Mira didn't waste time. She ordered the Veilon to drift behind the largest asteroid, cover the shuttle dock, and hold tight, while the Dauntless released a wave of flares and countermeasures, blinding 2 of the attackers and scoring a direct hit on a third, sending it spinning into space with smoke trailing from its side. The last attacker, the one targeting the Jaran ship, pulled back slightly as the drone fighters harassed it, peppering it with light fire, and Mira saw her chance. She ordered a precision strike from the main rail cannon, waited for the target to come into line, and fired. The blast punched straight through the hostile ship, cleaving it in half with a flash of white light, and the wreck spun out, crashing into a drifting rock and vanishing in a burst of debris. Inside the Veilon, the boarders began to fall apart. 2. Failing signals, no backup, their systems collapsing as if linked to the main ship. And Sean finished the last one with a plasma burst at close range, breathing hard, armor scorched, but standing tall. Then came silence again. Pure, perfect silence, broken only by the soft crackle of comms and the hiss of venting pressure as the last fires died. Mira looked over the field, at the wrecks, at the drifting asteroid shadows, and at the battered form of the Veilon, still holding together, still alive. They had survived, not because of luck, but because they stood together, human and Jaran, side by side, against something unknown and terrifying. And as she sent word to Earth Command and prepared to tow the damaged ship toward safer space, Mira knew the message had changed. Not just a rescue, not just a signal answered, but a promise made and kept in the dark. They would not fight alone. Again. The wreckage of the battle still drifted in silence when the Dauntless and the Veilon left drift point behind. Slow but steady as they moved together through deep space, one ship pulling the other across the stars with quiet engines and stronger hope than either had known before. And though the danger had passed for now, no one on board either vessel believed it was truly over, because the strange enemy had left too much mystery behind. No communication, no surrender, only darkness, destruction, and the cold certainty that they would return someday. Mira Thorne stood on the bridge of her ship, watching sensor logs replay in slow motion, studying every movement of the enemy ships, every strange energy reading, every flicker of data that didn't make sense. And beside her, Tikel sat quietly, in the co-pilot's seat, his once uncertain gaze now sharp with focus, because he had learned more in the last few days than in years of training. He had seen how humans fought, how they protected even strangers, and how they didn't turn away when things grew difficult. Behind them, the rest of the crew worked to keep systems running, repairing what they could, preparing for more, just in case. But tension remained, like a shadow trailing behind the ships, because no one knew why the enemy had attacked or where they came from. And until those answers were found, every quiet corner of space felt dangerous. On the Veilon, survivors moved slowly, carefully, adjusting to working with human crew, learning their tools, their language, their strange mix of humor and discipline, and the bond that had formed during battle grew stronger with each passing hour as Sean led joint patrols through the damaged corridors, and engineers from both species rewired systems that hadn't worked in decades, sharing stories and laughter and broken phrases, but always with a sense of watching, waiting, listening, for something to break the peace again. After 3 days of slow travel, a secure relay station finally came into range. Station Alpha 9, a small outpost on the edge of Sector 10, long forgotten by trade routes but still functional enough to transmit long-range messages and offer supplies. And Mira contacted them with urgency, explaining the events at Drift Point, the unidentified enemy, the damage to the Jaran ship, and the risk of a larger threat. And the station commander, an old veteran named Quinn, responded with calm efficiency, promising to relay the information to Earth Command and Jaran High Council through diplomatic channels, and to hold the dock open for medical teams and reinforcements. When the 2 ships arrived, limping but intact, the outpost flared to life, lights coming on, drones moving to assist, medics and techs waiting in the bays. And as the survivors disembarked, for the first time in weeks, they stepped onto solid ground with the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were safe. But peace was brief. Within hours, strange signals began arriving from nearby systems, short bursts of static, followed by silent moments of nothing, and Mira knew they were not natural, not random, but coded and deliberate, as if the enemy was probing the edges of known space, testing how far they could reach, and Argus confirmed the worst. The signal pattern matched fragments found during the Drift Point attack, meaning this wasn't over, not by far. Still, something had changed, because now the Jarans were no longer isolated, and the humans were no longer ignorant of what lurked in the dark, and already new plans were forming. Mira suggested a joint task force, one made of both species, trained to respond quickly to threats like this, to understand the enemy and protect the forgotten edges of space. Tikel supported the idea, sending word through the diplomatic line and offering his own service, ready to stay aboard the Dauntless if needed, and his voice carried weight now, because he had survived the worst and seen how powerful unity could be. Mira watched the message go out, knowing it would take time, but also knowing it was the first step toward something larger. Not just survival, but partnership. A new way forward that didn't leave people drifting alone in space. Hoping someone would answer. As night cycle settled over the outpost, Mira stood by the viewport, watching stars glint in the black, and she thought of how this all began, with a broken call from a crippled ship, and a choice to turn toward it instead of away. And she realized that in doing so, they had changed more than one life, more than one battle. They had changed the meaning of that silent space between stars, proving it didn't have to be empty, didn't have to be cold, because now it carried a signal, a voice, a promise, echoing louder with each passing day. You are not alone anymore.